Hello, I'm Sophie Gilmartin and I'm a reader in English literature at Royal Holloway, University of London. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. I'll perhaps start with some thoughts on Jane Eyre and social mobility. The Victorian period is a great period of social mobility. People raising themselves through the classes by merit, by hard work, through business and earning money and industry. This is all true. So what do you do with this poor orphan child, Jane Eyre? How is she going to be socially mobile, a young woman? Now, for most of the Victorian courtship or marriage plot, a woman is socially mobile in pretty much one way, and that's marriage. She marries up if she possibly can. That's the goal. And in fact, that does happen, doesn't it, in Jane Eyre? Jane marries Mr. Rochester. She goes from being a poor orphan girl from a sort of charitable status school to marrying a man of some wealth and estate. Nevertheless, that's not the whole story with Jane Eyre, and that's what I think makes it such a fascinating story at this period. This is not a regular, standard or conventional Victorian courtship plot of social mobility through marrying up. We see Jane in the classic Bildungsroman situation, the Bildungsroman, the novel of education, which forms that arc which goes from childhood to a closure in some sense of maturity. It goes from youth to maturity. And Jane's maturity comes from her education, from her intelligence, from her hard work, from her ability to work and to look outwards and to take fresh challenges, as she does when she is in the school and she realises it's the time to leave, and she puts an ad in the papers advertising herself as a governess. Jane at that point does not expect any great romantic fantasy. She's not even thinking of marriage at all, that this is suddenly going to raise her. She looks out the window and she says, God, grant me a new servitude. Just give me something different, something that I can challenge myself with. I'm not expecting riches or wealth or a wealthy husband or great romance. I want a new servitude. I want something that's substantial, that will challenge me. So that is partly the story of Jane Eyre. It is a story of social mobility, and it's social mobility unusual for a woman in that it is based on a woman who is looking to raise herself and do as well as she can in the world through being out in the world and working. There's that aspect to the story. Another way that sort of set of themes in the novel on a more abstract or conceptual level that I think helps in thinking about Jane Eyre is the division between fire and ice in the novel. And some critics, a few critics have written about this. For me, it starts very early on in the novel. When Jane is in the Red Room, she's rebellious when she's being hit and tormented by the Reed children. And there's one, I think, brilliant moment when she hears Mrs. Reed downstairs saying to her children, you are not to associate with her. And the 9-year-old girl leans over the banisters and says, they are not fit to associate with me. I mean, there's a lot of rebellion in that novel, and in those first stages of the young orphan Jane, it's both moving and painful when she's in the Red Room and she's really suffering, and also very funny at times. At our sympathy and shock in some ways for this young Victorian child who really does speak up for herself. So one of the servants in the Reed's house. Jane says, as the older narrator says, I think that Abbott thought of me as an infantine Guy Fawkes. So again, Guy Fawkes associated with explosion, associated with revolution, associated with fire, is associated with Jane. Jane, when she is angry with Mrs. Reed and finally speaks her mind to Mrs. Reed, says of herself as a child, I had burnt up, I was like fire in what I was saying to her. But the trouble is that when the smouldering goes down and the child is left to herself, she's just left with ashes and nothingness and is completely burnt out. So there's the exhaustion and the self-destruction of fire that Jane begins to understand and needs to learn to control as a young child. And of course, the great sign of what Jane is up against and what could happen if a woman can't control herself is Bertha Mason. Bertha, mad, uncontrolled, described as a creature both by Jane and Mr. Rochester, tries to burn Rochester in his bed. Jane quenches the fire. Jane puts that under control. And finally, Bertha Mason burns down Thornfield Hall and flings herself from its roof, burning. That is the end of this poor woman who has, well, you know, in our own terms, not had the help that she needs with her madness, but has been, as far as I think Bronte is concerned, not able to control her rage, and that can mean a complete destruction. Later in the novel, when Jane meets St. John Rivers, and St. John wants her to go to India as a missionary and become his wife, not because he loves her, but because the only way in Victorian social convention that she can accompany him is as his wife. Jane, out of a sense of duty, and perhaps another idea of a new servitude, having lost her great love, Rochester, looks for a new servitude and thinks that she could almost do it, go to India with St. John, but not as his wife. And he pressures her to become his wife. And Jane understands that what that would do to her is, as she describes, to be married to him and to have to go through all the conventions of marriage. And she says, which I know that he would take care to observe. In other words, that he would insist on having a sexual relationship with her, almost punctiliously, you know, without love, but because that's what he's supposed to do. Jane knows that would kill her. And she describes it in such a way that she said, to live with him, to be constantly keeping myself under control, would be like having my vitals burnt out one by one, and that she would die. She feels that the coldness and rigidity of this man, the iciness of this man, and she describes him as such, would cause her inward fires to be held so much inside her, that natural flame that she has, which is a good and healthy thing, her desires, her love, what she has to give to the world, would, her own opinions, her intelligence, would have to be kept inside, and it would burn her out and kill her. When at the end of the novel she goes back to Rochester, Rochester himself has suffered and has been burnt and blinded by fire in trying to save Bertha. And then these are two people who come together, who in some ways have had to deal with fire, the fire of their own natures, represented in physical fire and in physical, in fire symbolism in the novel. And they've both been scarred. They've both, in a sense, been burnt by fire, but have managed to control it, and they are able then to come together, two people who have both been scarred in some ways, to come together to heal each other and really love each other. It's a quiet ending hidden away in Ferndean between those two people, but eventually a joyful ending as well to this novel, which is so full of desire and passion and coldness and solitude and fire and ice.